Welcome to Tech News Briefing. It's Friday, July 21st. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Apple Maps seemed to get a little lost when it launched in 2012. But according to customers and user experience analysts, the app has become more appealing and easier to use in recent years. For some, it's now their go-to app for directions. While Apple might not need the app to sell more iPhones, the company's ambitions with cars and other devices that integrate maps depends on people actually liking to use the feature. Our personal tech reporter, Ann-Marie Alcántara, has been looking into the changes and talking to Apple Maps users, and she's here with those details. So first off, take us back to the beginning. What was Apple Maps like when it started?
So for those of you who can remember, it launched in 2012, and it was not a good time for Apple, for people trying to use it. For example, the Manhattan Bridge looked like a roller coaster if you looked at it on the map. Officials in Australia warned users not to use it because it was potentially life-threatening in some cases of like where the map would lead you to. Tim Cook, the CEO, even issued an apology about it.
So what exactly has changed then?
It's basically adopted a lot of features that Google and other mapping applications have had for many years into its own app. For example, right, like Google's iconic Street View feature that is now available as well on Apple. They call it Look Around, and people now like it and like that it's available on their phone. They don't have to download another app, and it's ready to go.
You've been talking to some people who made this switch to Apple Maps. What did they say drew them to make that change?
So one person that I spoke to said they really like the transit layer on Apple Maps versus Google. He liked that on Apple Maps, it's a little more condensed and streamlined, like the lines of different transit lines. They just look cleaner and they're less spaced out, whereas on Google, it takes over the map a bit more. Not that much more, but it's enough that it matters to him. He also believes that Apple will consistently suggest more creative ways for him to get around New York City, especially when there's like a subway that's out of service or something happens. And I spoke to another person who just liked that in the airport, the floor designs telling you where restaurants and cafes and shops and that sort of thing. It's a little more cleaner and easier to read on Apple. And she also had mentioned that she just likes that Apple Maps will show you the actual street name. It's a complaint I heard many times where on Google, you put in an address, you try to get there, and it just won't show you the street name of like your direction, where you're supposed to go. And you have to like zoom in and like do all these little things to get around. But Apple will just show you the street name.
Why is Apple Maps important to the iPhone maker?
So Apple Maps is important across a variety of Apple products. It's found in things like Find My Friends, where, if you have friends tracking your location and you're tracking theirs, or even things like AirTags, like that uses Apple Maps. And other things as well, such as your Apple Watch. If you have Apple Maps running, you don't even have to look at your phone. You can just get directions on your watch and it'll vibrate and tell you when to go or, get off. And it also connects with CarPlay, which is Apple's car map user interface experience. And you just plug in your phone and it'll pull up Apple Maps immediately. It's just something that's really built in across all of Apple's products.
What have executives at Apple said about the updates to Apple Maps?
In 2020, Apple's head of software, he had mentioned that, maps have come a long way and that people have noticed. And even this year at the Worldwide Developers Conference in June, Apple has also announced offline maps, which is another feature that Google's had for many years, is now coming to Apple. So they keep iterating and, updating the app to adapt to whatever people want on it.
Are there any limitations, as we're talking about how improved Apple Maps has become, that still need to be fixed?
One person mentioned that they're in LA and they have an internship and they're commuting every day by car. And with CarPlay and Apple Maps will just constantly suggest a supposedly quicker route that takes them through residential neighborhoods versus the highway. And he believed it just adds way more to his commute. And another person mentioned that she uses it for walking directions a lot in Boston. And she's a fast walker. And so she'll look at the map to figure out where to go, start walking, and it's half a mile in, and then looks at the map again. And that's when like the app recalculates and realizes she was going in the wrong direction the whole time. And so It still struggles with some, perhaps, traffic and compass navigation for some people.
I want to take a moment to talk about Apple's main competitor, Google, who you've mentioned a few times. What does it mean for Google if a lot of people switch from their maps to Apple Maps?
So for anyone who's used Google Maps, you look at it and there's tons of businesses, there's sponsored listing of businesses, and we all know that Google's a big advertising giant. And so if people start moving away from Google into Apple, those businesses that sponsor listings on Google Maps potentially lose customers. And it's just another loss of users that Google potentially could target with advertising. And then, of course, there's just the more someone gets ingrained into an Apple product, the less they might be willing to continue using Google products and so on and so forth.
Is Google making any updates of its own?
Google Maps has also undergone many evolutions throughout the years, and things like an immersive 3D view have also launched this year, where you can get a look at a place 3D and you can check what it looks like at different times of day. And that's something that Apple doesn't necessarily have yet. And they also have an AR tool that you just hold up your phone. You don't even have to type in, a bank or ATM, whatever it might be you're looking for. And it'll start suggesting sort of points of interest for you.
All right, that's our personal tech reporter, Ann-Marie Alcántara, with updates on how we can get where we need to go. Thanks for joining us, Ann-Marie.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week's Tech News Briefing. TNB's producer is Julie Chang. We had editorial support from Catherine Millsop. Our supervising producer is Melanie Roy, and our executive producer is Chris Sinsley. I'm your host, Zoe Thomas. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great weekend.